Well, I've been feeling a little down all week, and I had nose surgery a couple of years back to rotor-root my nose. And ever since then, my nose has always run. And so feeling down, my nose been runny, and I didn't think anything of it. But then I took a COVID test this morning, and the results suck. I've been down a lot of the week. I hadn't been able to get anything done. But today I'm feeling all right, so I'm getting back out here. And this is a truck that we picked up from my son the other day. He and I went and got this. We bought it at an auction from the local college. It's got the Boat Anchor 305 in it. We got it running. Runs beautifully, except it won't stay running. As soon as you give it gas, it dies. We got to change up the fuel pump on it. But really clean, half-ton, long bed Chevy pickup. Full of all kinds of junk to go through. Dash is cracked up, but I actually saw one of these dashes laying at pull apart intact a couple weeks ago, and they always have them, and they're usually not cracked up. There's usually one or two that are intact, and so I can get another dash for this truck, and we'll swap that out at some point. But right now, he just needs a driver. It was a theft recovery. The college owned it, and somebody came along and stole it. And when they got it back, they decided to just get rid of the truck. Of course, the catalytic converter is missing. Gonna have to put a bumper on it or sledgehammer this one straight. Fortunately, I already have a new handle for it. I accidentally bought one too many last time. And there's a rust hole there. I've got a new fuel pump and sending unit to put in it, which Cole was going to come over and we were going to replace that today, but with me having COVID, he's not coming over. I'm just going to get out here and do what I can real quick. There's only one stud on the air cleaner and it's missing the nut, so to get it home, when I was trying to drive it, we just put a vice grip on that. We only drove this thing for about a quarter of a mile, and then the fuel pump stalled out, so more to come. Alright, so if you've got a GMT400, you got this little tiny battery spot here. How do you fit a bigger battery if you want more cranking amps? Well, there's a bolt here on the fender side of this, and there's this bolt here, and I think, yeah, there's two more bolts back here that go through the end from the fender. You pull this battery tray out, you hammer this edge flat, and you can fit a 65 series battery in here. The one in Way Cool Jr. is 850 cranking amps, and that's more than enough battery for this engine, and Walmart sells them cheap for like 120 bucks. I've got a 65 series battery for this. It's only a 650 cranking amp one, but I'm going to modify this battery tray so that we can put it in here. And I'm also, the thing about 65 series batteries is they don't have side posts. And yeah, I'm chopping these off and going top post. Side posts were a really chintzy idea that was never done well. So I'm going to fix that. Okay, I got the first four bolts out, and remember there's one more way down here at the bottom. If you come up under here, there it is right there. Now, when you're putting the battery tray back in, you do want to put all 5 bolts in. 5 bolts seems like overkill for a battery tray, and you may be tempted to say, oh, I can't reach this one, you know, especially if your wheels are clumped, you know, if you got bigger wheels and you can't get in there easy, oh, I'll just leave those out. But the reason there's 5 bolts in this one simple battery tray is it's supporting a lot of weight. The battery weighs a lot. And if you get in a wreck, the last thing you want is for the battery to come out of position and arc against the frame or something. So be sure and put all 5 of your battery bolts back in. I've got a wiring diagram for these trucks, and so I checked. In this section here, I was pretty sure it was fusible link, and it is. Can't really read it, it's kind of old. But apparently they did blow the fusible link at some point and decided to fix it. And I guess that is, it feels like there's something more going on here. I don't know. I guess that is soldered. But I'm gonna have to nip this back and redo it. And then I'm gonna lop off these cable ends and put the top post battery ends on it. Alright, so I started cutting back the fusible link here to try to get past the corrosion, and no matter how far back I cut, there's still corrosion in here. So the fusible link, I think, is actually a little bit porous and allows water in or air in or something, because all this copper's oxidated. The thing I don't like about fusible link is when it gets old, you can't tell this is fusible link. You can't read it. I can get it, maybe if I zoom in here just right. It's trying to focus, but you can barely read that it says fusible link. And people who don't know will go in here and just think it's regular wire. Well, if you replace this fusible link with a piece of regular wire, you can have a short in your truck and burn your truck to the ground. So I'm going to switch to this fuse box. I just modified these brackets. This is off an RX-7. I just had it laying on the shelf. I used to have a bunch of RX-7s. I'm going to bolt this here next to the battery, and I'm going to have a couple of Pacific fuses in it, the big fusible, the big fuses. And it's going to be bolted here, and I'm going to make terminals. I've got the connectors going backside here, so that if my son decides he wants to add some more circuits to the truck, if he wants to put on an electric fan or put a big stereo, he can just put a wire in the back here and run that wire to whatever he needs to. And we'll just put the appropriate size big fuse there. And that'll make a nice under hood place for tapping power. It'll clean up this mess. I'll run these directly to it. And this will go up to the battery terminal, and that'll resolve the wiring issue for the battery. Alright, so I got the battery in place here. What I didn't show was I actually took my grinder and I trimmed the lip on the battery on this side to fit down into here. It won't drop into place unless you trim this lip off. I left the center section here for this to clamp onto. And I had to find a bolt for this. There wasn't a bolt. This hold down was laying in the cab of the truck. And if I'd used the factory bolt, I don't think it would go down far enough. Anyway, so I grabbed this out of my bolt bin. I actually had to trim it down to get it to fit. I could feel on the bottom side though, and the bolt does go all the way through the nut on the bottom. So, and the battery is secure. It's not coming loose. So I'm happy with that. Working on the battery connections. I've still got to make pigtails for these. But then again, you know, I've got the fuse box that I'm going to put up here. So these are going to go here. Main power cable is here. It's going to come up, and it's got plenty of room. As a matter of fact, I can re-bolt this back down. We had to move the main power cables in order to get the truck, to fire the truck up, because they didn't reach when we had the battery out of La Cucaracha in here to get this thing fired up, and the positive terminal's over here. So in order to stretch them, we had to unbolt that down there and pull the cable over diagonal this way instead of coming up this way. So with it in place, it's an interesting question now as to whether or not this main power cable is gonna, it looks like it's gonna reach. But I'm gonna put a lug on the end. It may be a little short. I may have to replace that cable as well. The negative cable, I can tell for sure, it's gonna be stretched straight out to get over here. And I don't like that. So I already know it's coming off. It just goes to the top of the block right here. And I've got this cable here. I had this terminal on the end already. I'm not sure when I did that, but it's nice and crimped on. So I put some heat shrink on it, and I'm going to measure it to fit, and I'm just going to run it nice and neat over there like it's supposed to go. I do sometimes get tired of people telling you what you absolutely have to do whenever you do battery terminals. Oh, you got to put some solder on there, you got to do this, you got to shrink wrap, whatever. This is the factory GM terminal for the negative cable. And what do you see here? You see stranded wire in too small of a gauge, I've got to say that. Crimped straight on, no protection. This lasted 30 years. So if there are guys telling you that you've got to shrink wrap, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, remember, this is what GM engineers said was good enough. Honestly, I do like using some heat shrink tubing. I've got the negative cable bolted on in place. It's got heat shrink on it down there. I don't have this end done yet, but I'm going to heat shrink it, and I'm going to protect it appropriately. And the wire quality I'm using is higher quality than this stuff, even though it's probably about the same gauge. But don't let people oversell you on what you have to do. So have you ever had somebody complain to you that, I've got a brand new alternator, I've got a brand new battery, and still my truck won't start? And, there can't be anything else wrong with it. I've fixed everything. Well, things may look good on the surface, but what's that battery cable look like on the other end? Now, granted, this is actually a cable I robbed off something else, just for an example, but that's what you get a lot of times. And if you're working on your own stuff, you've got to be mindful. This isn't the only thing in the circuit. The alternator's not the only thing in the circuit. You've got to get the power from your battery to the vehicle and back again. If you don't have a good continuous loop, including the grounds, you're not going to have a good electrical system. You're going to have starting issues. So when you see stuff like this, fix it. If you're having a starting issue or you're having a hard starting, look for stuff like this. Get under there, get to that starter. Now, I actually hadn't pulled out the original starter wire out of here yet, and I was going to size this up to see if it would make it that far. But that's the kind of thing you got to look for. If I'm going to reuse this cable, I've got to nip this end off and put a good end on it. So be mindful of that stuff. All right, I'm working on my son's truck today, and I ran across something interesting. It's got fusible links under the hood. They go from the battery to some of the accessories and stuff. And I'm not a big fan of fusible links. Most technicians don't really understand what fusible links are. Basically, it's just a piece of undersized wire that when it gets too hot, melts. And the sheathing on it is supposed to keep all that metal inside, and it just blows internally. And so, it works like a fuse, but you're relying on that sheath to keep it from starting a fire under your hood. And that usually works. Usually. I don't like usually. I like fuses. And this is a Pacific Fuse. I think it's the Pacific Fuse Company made these. I think they're actually called PAL fuses. And this is off an RX-7. And you run a main power wire to this, and then you've got main power wire, and then you've got everything else taps off of this to run your extra circuits. And so I'm putting one of these under the hood of my son's truck, and I went to take the wires loose. And the nice thing about them is, these connectors, even though they look kind of small and they're kind of old, they can actually carry a fair amount of amperage. You just got to pull these out and get new terminals and put your new wires in. I really don't want to go to splicing thicker wires to small wires if I can help it. And then you end up with a new fuse right there, and it defeats the whole purpose of getting rid of the fusible link. So anyways, I've got one of these under the hood already, and I'm working on repinning it. And I got the connector out, and I'm running into an issue with the terminals. These are the terminals that came out of it, and as far as I can tell, they're a Packard 56. The Packard Motor Company made terminals that became an industry standard, and they're used in everything up until the 80s. And I believe that's what's in these. And this is a Mazda, and they use this standard style terminal. And so I have some other similar terminals, and I figured, I'll see if these will work. And so I got one of these and got it ready. And these are really kind of undersized to carry the kind of current. but I can get it up in here and it won't go all the way in. Okay. So then I bought a bunch of Packard 56 terminals. And as you can see, I've tried a handful of these already, and they wouldn't crimp, or they would, I couldn't crimp them in right to get them in to here. And they're also just slightly too large for my set of crimpers here. If you use a standard size set of crimpers, you can crimp the smaller end of the Packard 56 with your large size here. So I'm crimping these in, and they're doing the same thing. When I use these Packard style connections, they'll go in just as far as these. And then I got to looking at the terminals. These Packard 56s I got are not the same as these old style ones that are already in here. Now if you look, I'm coming up short. They're coming up about that far and not going all the way to the end like they need to. And if you look where the crimped wire is going to end up, if you put these side by side, it's short the right amount. So how do you get these to go all the way up to the top? My problem is the locking tab isn't catching this piece because it's butting up against the wire before that piece gets into it to lock. Well, I got one to lock finally. And basically what I did was I crimped the wire down here where you're supposed to crimp the insulation, and I folded these upper two flat. I don't really like that, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Now, I'm going to nip this one off here that I tried and see if I can get it to go all the way in like it's supposed to. I did this other side already and it worked, so let's see where I get. And I'm going to be careful how deep I chuck this wire in here. I'm going to bear just as much wire as I need to. Well, that didn't work. Nope. Yeah, so my crimper doesn't crimp these. If you compare the openings on these Packard 56s, you could see why they're able to carry so much more current. They're definitely beefier. I can't even get this to crimp on to this wire using my normal crimper. But here's a trick. All right, so now these front ones I got to fold down. All right, and I'm not going to try to crush them, but I want them flat enough that this is going to go in. And this is not as tight as I want it to be, so I'm going to solder it. You got to wonder when you find a bottle of this under the seat of the truck,